And now let's take a look at the latest on the Australian Prime Minister's visit to China. A short time ago, Anthony Albanese met with China's Premier Li Qiang. It marked one of the final events before the trip concludes today. On Monday, Mr. Albanese met with China's leader Xi Jinping. The president praised his country's improved ties with Australia, saying the two sides had worked out some problems. In recent years, China and Australia have clashed on a number of political issues. Beijing imposed restrictions on Australian imports as well, some of which have since been lifted. Well, I discussed the key issues with Yuan Zhang, a former policy advisor to the Australian government. I asked her about the significance of these talks.
It is a sign that the bilateral relationship has finally turned a corner. Many of the major frictions in the relationship was resolved or in the process of being resolved in preparation for this trip. So it is a very significant trip for both countries.
So what's been achieved?
Well, diplomatically speaking, the fact that the two governments are talking again. So in the last 5 years of the difficult relationship under the previous Australian government, the Chinese government has not really been engaged or willing to talk to the Australian government at all. And instead, it was very much focused on punishing Australia for its perceived transgressions against China's national interest. But now the two sides are talking again, and in practical outcomes, some of the trade sanctions have been lifted, and certainly one of the political prisoners, Chen Lei, has been released in the lead up to the trip as well.
Do you think the trade relationship, which of course is so important for both countries, it's been very, very strained, and that was what brought this to a head really in a major way, because for some parts of the Australian economy and Chinese, they've really felt the pain, haven't they?
Well, the Australian economy has been surprisingly resilient despite the trade sanctions. So several sectors have been hit very hard. For example, the wine industry in Australia, because there's not as a big of a market elsewhere apart from China. But lots of other industries have found new markets, and certainly overall bilateral trade, that is export from Australia to China, has not actually declined despite the trade sanctions.
And the warming of the relationship that we've seen in the last 4 days, because of course Anthony Albanese has now finished his 4-day visit, what does it mean for China's participation in some other kind of trade groups within the region, that kind of thing?
So China is very keen to join the CPTPP. And Australia is, of course, being one of the original signatories, have a big influence on that. So that could be one of the areas that could be a potential for cooperation between the two countries. And there are still, but there are still outstanding trade disputes to be resolved before that can happen.
Yeah, there is a lot to discuss. That was Yuan Zhang there, who was a former advisor to the Australian government.